Hey everyone, welcome to our program. My name is Ranger Luis, and today I want to talk about one of our least talked about wildlife in the park. And they only seem to get attention around this time of the year. They're small, they fly, they can be pretty hard to see, and can be extremely difficult to hear. Maybe you have a good idea of what I'm talking about. If you guessed bats, then you are correct. Bats are fascinating animals that we have here in the park, and I just love learning and talking more about them. Did you know we have bats here in the Santa Monica Mountains? I know it can be pretty difficult to see them because you only have a short window of time to actually see them flying in the sky. They are nocturnal, so they're mainly active at night, so really you have just this small window of sunset where you can see them flying, foraging for food at night. Next time you're out here in the mountains or even in urban environments, keep an eye out for them. Bats are very unique animals and play a vital role in not just our ecosystem here, but across the world, and also have a huge impact on the economy. So today we'll talk a little bit more about the bats we can find here in the Santa Monica Mountains. Bats are mammals, so they give birth to live young. Bats are the only mammals capable of true sustained flight. And I know what you're thinking, hey Luis, what about those flying squirrels? It's in the name. What about them? They can't even fly, all they do is glide. Bats are actually excellent flyers. They're able to maneuver very quickly through the night. And here's a piece of trivia for you. They actually are the fastest mammal in the world. Don't tell the cheetahs that, they might not like it. Bats are also responsible for pollinating over 500 species of plants. Bats save farmers around $23 billion annually by reducing pests and the use of pesticides on their crops. Bats are mammals in the order of Chiroptera, and that Greek name translates to hand wing, which helps describe the bat. If you take a closer look at their wings, you actually notice a lot of similarities to actually our hands. They have 4 fingers and a thumb, but of course theirs is connected with a fleshy membrane that is a part of their wing and helps them fly. Traditionally, we have 2 suborders of bats. We have Megachiroptera, which are the much larger old world fruit-eating bats that are found in tropical and subtropical regions. And then we have Microchiroptera, which are the much smaller echolocating bats found here locally. Today we'll talk more about the microbats only because they're found here in the Santa Monica Mountains and the greater US. Microbats are known to be insectivores, but many of them have evolved to have a very dynamic range in their diet. Some of them eat pollen, nectar, fruits, fish, and some even drink blood. But don't worry about those. There are only about 3 species of blood or vampire bats, and they're not found here in the US. And they definitely do not go after people. They only go for cattle or other large livestock. Now that it's dark outside, let's go see if we can find some bats. One of the things I found most fascinating when I started learning about bats was the role they play as pollinators. And that's something I never really thought about, and it's sort of hard to imagine. But without bats, we wouldn't have bananas, mangoes, figs, avocados, almonds. That's just to name a few. To give you an example of nectar-eating bats, there are the lesser long-nosed bat and the Mexican long-tongued bat, which travel thousands of miles to pollinate cactus and other desert species plants. They travel from Mexico all the way up to Arizona, Texas, and New Mexico, and play an essential role in the desert ecosystem. Here are 2 of the most popular things you might be familiar with that bats are responsible for pollinating. 1 would be chocolate, and 2 would be tequila. You have to be 21 or older for that one. The lesser long-nosed bat and the Mexican long-nosed bat are responsible for pollinating the blue agave, which is used to produce tequila. And for chocolate production, there are actually bats that eat the seeds from cacao trees, and once they're finished eating them, they'll go ahead and drop them along in their surrounding area and actually help with reforestation. Next time you have any of these fruits, chocolate, or some tequila, make sure to thank a bat. Let's talk about the bats that we have here in the Santa Monica Mountains. We have the Mexican free-tailed bat, Western pipistrelle, Yuma myotis, California myotis, small-footed myotis, big brown bat, pallid bats, red bats, western Mastiff Bat, hoary bats, and spotted bats. So many of the places that our bats use for habitat here are also used across the US. But in colder regions, many bats use caves as hibernaculum, which is probably the first thing we might think of when we think of bat habitat. Here in the Santa Monica Mountains, we don't really have an extensive cave system like other places do. Habitat is important for all wildlife, and for bats especially, it can vary throughout the year. So here's a popular question we got from our Instagram, and the question was, do bats hibernate or do they migrate? And the answer to that is not that simple, because every bat is different. Some bats do decide to migrate and they will move into warmer regions where they can find a good source of food, for example, bugs and insects. And some bats choose to stay behind in colder climates. Now, for the bats that decide to stay behind in these colder regions, it may be a little more challenging for them. They don't exactly go into hibernation, but they enter a state of torpor. And going into a state of torpor means the bat will reduce its metabolic rate, so that means it'll reduce its breathing, its heartbeat, and overall its entire sort of body system to conserve more energy for the long winter ahead. Remember, in colder regions, there are no bugs or insects out for these bats to eat, so they need to conserve all the energy they can. I want to give you a really cool example of what a bat's heart rate will be when they're awake and active versus once they go into torpor. Let me show you. So here I have a metronome that will give us the beats per minute, and I want to give you first the example of what our heart rate, human heart rate, could be while we're resting, and then we'll compare it to a bat's heart rate while they're active and then also when they're in the state of torpor. So here we have the metronome at 70 beats per minute, which is average or so for humans. Our heart rate can be anywhere from 60 beats per minute up to 100 beats per minute. So if you can imagine that being your heartbeat. And then if we're exercising or running, might go up to 120, 125. And that's once you're really moving. Now I want you to imagine what a bat's heart rate while they're flying and foraging, what that might sound like. It's a lot faster than this. So let's go ahead and jump up to that. So a bat's heart rate can be anywhere from 200 up to close to like 300 beats per minute, which is pretty insane if you were to think about your heart beating that fast. So this is an active bat flying through the sky, getting food, eating. And then now let's see what that will sound like once they go into torpor, once they are reducing their heart rate, they're reducing all of their sort of bodily functions to conserve energy. We're going to bring it all the way down, and I want you to listen to this. The heart rate can go as slow as 10 beats per minute. If your heart's beating that slow, you might need to go to the hospital. But for a bat, this is a great way to conserve energy, and they can survive the rest of the winter. So torpor is a very valuable adaptation that they have to adapt to these colder regions, and it's really just a fascinating way for them to survive. We'll talk more about torpor a little later. Now I want to talk about one of the coolest things about bats, and that's their echolocation. This is a very unique method for hunting, and bats have really specialized in using this ability to forage in the night, and echolocation is a way that they can sort of enhance their vision. Of course, bats are not blind, right? But echolocation is a great tool to use while they're hunting through the night looking for food. Now, I want to show you a quick example. I want to talk about sound a little bit more, and this is connected to echolocation. So, as a bat is calling out different sounds, they vary in frequency and pitch. Sound travels at varying distances depending on its pitch or frequency. So, lower frequencies like this are much lower and they have a larger sine wave, so they can travel further distances. And then we have higher pitches that are much tighter frequencies and they don't travel very far. So a bat's echolocation is in a much higher frequency range. Their echolocations are anywhere from 20 to 100 kilohertz. And our hearing range is only up to maybe 20 kilohertz. So it makes it very difficult for us to hear. Their echolocation is ultrasonic versus us not really being able to hear that. There are a couple exceptions to that, where there are some bats that make clicking sounds that are a little more audible to us. And the Western Mastiff Bat, which is one that we have here in the Santa Monica Mountains, is actually generally really loud, only because its echolocation call is actually really low in the frequency range. So its range is closer to our hearing range. So that is one of those bats that you could potentially hear at night. We got another great question from Instagram from one of you. And the question was, do bats get confused with other bats' echolocation? And the answer is, they actually can change the pitch and their frequency so that they do not confuse each other or have an overlap in their calls. Also keep in mind, every bat species have different ranges of their echolocation calls. Some calls are longer, some calls are shorter, but even within different bat species, they can sort of customize their own bat call so that they can recognize their own and not get confused with another. Since it is almost impossible to hear these echolocations on our own, luckily we do have some pretty great devices that will sort of translate those calls into an audio level that we can interpret. Let me show you. So here I have an echo meter, which is a really awesome device you attach to an iPad. And this will pick up the frequency from a higher pitch frequency from the echolocation and translate it for us so that we can hear it back. Right now I have it on live, so it's sort of actively looking for bats that may be around us. Just a few moments ago, we did have a little bit of a tracking. It's a hit or miss sometimes. It depends what time of the night you're out. But I do have some recordings that I can show you. So here are some recordings that I took a few months ago here in the Santa Monica Mountains. Now this spectrogram here is showing you the shape of the call, and that is a great way to learn how to identify some of these bats. Since different bats have different calls, they all sort of look different. I'll show you an example of another one. This one gives you a nice example of a feeding buzz, which is a rapid fire echolocation call where the bat is now honing in on their prey. So they're getting close to their food and it starts buzzing really fast. And sometimes you can actually hear that on your own if they're close enough to the ground. But listen to this. Pretty cool, huh? I really love this device, especially when you get to go outside and go for a hike, and especially around sunset is when some bats are more active than others. But this is a really great tool for bat biologists to go out into the field and be able to grab recordings of different bats. And once you study bats a little bit more, you can then learn to identify them just by looking at the shape of their call. It's pretty fascinating technology we have now to study our bats. Unfortunately, bats are being impacted by a disease and millions are dying across the US. This disease is known as white nose syndrome. And this fungal disease has been affecting millions of bat roosts or hibernaculums, where sometimes up to 90 or 100% of populations are dying in certain caves. This fungal disease was originally found in New York and it has been spreading ever since. What this fungus does is that it interrupts a bat while it's in torpor. Remember, While the bat is in torpor, it is trying to conserve as much energy as it can during the winter. And this fungus will grow on its face and it'll disturb it or arouse the bat to sort of re-emerge or awaken, and will go outside of its roost thinking that there might be food out there. Now, as bats leave their roost because they were disturbed by this fungus, remember, they're looking for food and there's nothing out there in the middle of winter. So then they return back later to be disturbed again by that same fungus, reawakening them out of their torpor. So it is important that whenever you're recreating or visiting other national parks, that if you were in a cave at any point, try not to bring the same gear or clothing or anything that you had with you. Don't bring it into a different cave, because those fungal spores can live on our equipment or clothing if not disinfected properly. No need to worry. This white nose syndrome does not affect humans and it cannot be transmitted from person to person. Now, I know it can be pretty sad to learn about the impacts that white nose syndrome is having on our bats, but that's why it's important that we talk about it and bring awareness to bats and really just bat conservation. I really enjoy talking and learning more about bats, and I hope that today you learned something new. I hope I sparked your curiosity, and we'll be here for you if you have any questions. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on the trails.